right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern-day spiritual paradise. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and most importantly, a kid raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1970s and 80s, on into service privileges in the 90s and 2000s. As I like to do here, warning, we try to have some fun. There's going to be some laughs, sarcasm, my own brand of humor and observation, but it's all in an effort to heal, maybe be a little entertained, laugh a little, cry a little. It depends on the subject, but please note, it is never meant to offend. Never. Just my own brand of all things Jehovah's Witnesses. And boy, oh boy, do we have a big one this week. What a couple of weeks here on planet Earth, huh? I mean, we have had no shortage of drama. We've got things like spy balloons. We've got an almost daily threat of World War III. We've got South Park episodes about certain royals. We had a Super Bowl. It's been a very busy week or two here on planet Earth, and I guess by extension the solar system and the universe. Very, very busy. But folks, none of any of those headlines, any of those events, anything compares to the shakeup going on in heaven and God's organization. Jesus is making moves, and the moves of just a few weeks ago, adding 2 new guys to the governing body, suddenly make a little bit more sense, but pale in comparison to what happened over the last 48 hours. At the time of this recording, the earth is still tremoring. It is still shaking, and the universe, including this podcast host, has a whole bunch of questions. Nothing compares to the rarity of the events of this week among Jehovah's Witnesses. With Jesus Christ himself set to lead the largest genocide in the history of the universe any second now, it looks like he just cut one of his top pitchers. I told myself I was going to avoid snarky remarks. I'm going to try to avoid one-liners on liquor, blown out matches, and what the hell all of this means for poor Caleb and Sophia. But listen, who the hell am I kidding? I'm going to double down. I'm going to double down like never before on this little show. It's not every day that Jesus Christ is making moves that affect all of mankind. He goes decades without doing anything other than amassing property, commercial real estate, on a planet he wants us to know he's going to destroy any minute now. Or the rare new light where he tells us that he's decided generations can suddenly overlap. Or hell, I've always appreciated how you can have blood fractions but not have blood. Subject for another show. Nope. Sorry. Not sorry. This week and the events of this week are far too special and long awaited to ignore. And so I plan on thoroughly enjoying the next little bit on this show as we take a look at what is going on in the universe. Let's review. Jesus has built quite a team in the heavens. His current roster is 144,000 deep. And features some highly skilled kingly types, royals. Guys like Stephen Lett, the baby hater, tight-ass David Splain, and who could forget noted liars like Jeffrey Jackson. But folks, the entire lineup has changed this week. While the governing body just weeks ago has been adding members, no one, and I mean no one, could have seen what was coming. They actually removed one. The infamous and highly warm and fuzzy Anthony Morris III is no longer part of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. You heard that correctly. In breaking news in February 2023, the king here on earth, soon to be in heaven, Anthony Morris III, is no longer part of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. And folks, I got questions. I'm just going to reel a few off the top of my head as we jump in. The most obvious of one, with news of this magnitude that has shaken the heavens and all of the universe, is this. Wasn't Tony appointed by Holy Spirit? That crazy Jesus, did he make another mistake? This seems like a pretty big mistake. He was appointed by Holy Spirit. And as we go down the crazy line of questions I have about this week's events, how does one remove a king exactly? How does that work? Is it an overthrow? Is it a corporate takeover? How does this work? Is Tony Morris still an elder? As in, he can't necessarily be in the spotlight giving us new light and blowing out matches because he isn't fit, I should say, to sit in that kind of a throne and judge God's people, but he's still okay to counsel people at your local kingdom hall? I mean, is that a truth? Is the faithful and discreet slave weaker now? Did Jesus just need to reassign Tony to a new position? Humble him up like he did Moses? In really human terms, I've got questions like, does he have to give up his current room at the upstate New York compound/resort? Does he go from a real nice like lake view room to just a room with one window? But there's deeper questions, right? Whenever Jesus makes a move like this from the heavens, from the sky seats, immediately in the minds of us mentally diseased apostates who have left this organization, our questions steer to things far more salacious, far more interesting. For example, did Tony do something wrong? I mean, aside from bashing fashion or his own obvious struggles with his sexuality or his love of expensive liquors, inquiring minds want to know, did he do something wrong? For example, he didn't get involved with, how do I say this delicately? He didn't get overly involved or too close to a pillow, did he? We've heard the dangers of that at Bethel. Or maybe, oh my, God forbid, this can't be possible. He didn't have pants so tight that it rubbed him the wrong way, if you know what I'm saying, did he? These are the questions we want to know. In a far more serious light, I can't help but wonder, and I want to poke around on this, how much liability did one of Jesus' main guys present to the legal department? How about the PR team that Jesus has assigned there in upstate New York? Did they get involved in this decision, or did Jesus make this one on his own? I couldn't help but wonder, as I got this news, if Jesus maybe is just more interested in featuring someone more charismatic on all the videos moving forward. Somebody like the charismatic and warm Kenneth Cook. What a fireball of emotion he is. I couldn't also help but wonder, how does Sam Hurd feel about this? Does he even know what's going on? He seems a little, he seems like he's struggling with that a little bit right now. He seems a little lost at times. As a guy who loves trophies, I had to wonder, did Tony Morris get like a lifetime service plaque from Jesus? Jesus mouthpiece from 2005 to 2013. I don't know. The questions are endless. They're endless. I've got so many questions. And listen, if you think I'm trying to be funny, I am. I have to point out that we're not alone. When a decision like this is made from the heavens, from the sky seats, Jehovah's looking on to see what Jesus is going to do. We have to assume, right? You have to wonder who else is sitting around going, what the hell just happened? We're in good company. It's not hard to see, and it's not a reach to see that the angels, that's right, the genderless guys with wings who really like how attractive our human ladies are, they to be involved. I'm sure the angels too have questions. Just that's the whole thing of universal sovereignty, right? The angels are sitting back going, wait a minute, Tony, not my Tony. They've been helping Tony for years. They've been helping Tony, supporting him, propping him up. Don't believe me? Oh boy. The Watchtower of 2017, February, pages 23 through 28, in the aptly titled questioned article, Who is Leading God's People Today? We get this nugget of Holy Spirit that Tony Morris himself, as a governing body member, wanted us to have. It says, quote, evidence of angelic assistance. The governing body today has the colossal task of overseeing an international preaching work involving our 8 million evangelizers. Why has that work been so successful? For one, angels are involved. That's right. In many cases, publishers have called on individuals who had just been praying for help. End quote. There you have it. Angels. It's not just us that have questions about Tony Morris no longer being a member of the governing body. I had to wonder, when you get these kind of nuggets of Holy Spirit, if Tony had his own angel, or maybe he had Tony's angels. Okay, that was bad. And maybe he was even hoping to reunite with them in heaven for a good fireball tossing contest where he aimed at women and children who had rejected him and the angels while out in field service. We will never know now, will we? But aside from my questions on this momentous event, I think it would be fun, it would be somewhat insightful to take a look back at Tony's time as one of Jesus' chosen guys, to make some wild suppositions or predictions as to what may have gotten this guy kicked out of the top of Jesus' rotation, and maybe even look at the history of governing body members who go from earthly kings to just another Jehovah's Witness. So I want to note that at the point or the time of this recording, anything we have on Tony Morris leaving the governing body is pure conjecture. Maybe there'll be news before this episode airs over the next 48 hours, 72 hours or so. I don't know. But everything I have to say or that I've observed is, for the most part, conjecture on what may have happened, what will happen, and who may join him. We'll see. But I still think it's worth exploring what may be at the heart of Jesus' latest move. I mean, come on. Anytime you remove a king on earth and the faithful and discreet slave class gets smaller, those required to obey them, you and I, and every other human being, we have a right to wonder why, don't we? Why did a guy that just yesterday, if he told me to not take blood, and if I disobeyed him and I'd be disfellowshipped, why do I not have to listen to him anymore today? It's funny what just one day will do for Jesus' rotation in the governing body. I present to you this nugget of Watchtower, 1987, August 1st, pages 10 through 15, with a very similar title, which says, Christ actively leads his congregation. It says, quote, and you'll note with these times, Tony Morris was a witness. It says, quote, the book of Acts, relating the history of the early years of Christianity, shows beyond doubt that Christ used his authority by actively leading his congregation on earth. He did this by means of the Holy Spirit, the angels, there they are again, and the governing body, made up of the 12 apostles and the elders of the Jerusalem congregation. Not to be confused with the Antioch congregation, just Jerusalem. Jesus stated that he would be with his disciples right up to the conclusion of the system of things, where we now are. 1987, end quote. Oh boy, so much to unpack in reference to the governing body, of which just got lighter. But you'll note that it is how Jesus leads his organization. So with that as a foundation, we take a look at Tony Morris. We've all come to know Tony Morris fairly well over the last few years. He's been a predominant personality in the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. We've seen how toxic he is, how nasty. We've seen the hate speech. We've seen his love for pants that rub your nether regions and a propensity for sharing how much he can't wait to kill all the rest of us that don't agree with him. But I ask you this, and in an effort to, yes, continue kicking a man when he's down, have you ever considered the life story of King Tony Morris? How Jesus landed on him, then this week apparently changed his mind. I want to take a few minutes and rewind, take a look back, and really honor the man that is Tony Morris, King Tony Morris. The Watchtower of 2015, May 15th, pages 3 through 8, featured a story called Remembering My First Love Has Helped Me to Endure. Yes, folks, this is the Tony Morris story. If you're connecting the date of 2015, you'll note that Tony had been a governing body member by 10 years now, and apparently in an effort to feed the rest of us spiritually, he thought it was important for us to know his life story. So, on the just days or hours from one of the biggest events in universe history, let's look at the story. It's full of fascinating and downright ignorant comments. Try not to laugh. I'm already failing miserably. But it contains some tidbits about the recently canned king that, well, for at least me, only create more questions. I'm excited to share that he mentions the women in his life in this article, which is a rarity, including his mother, his wife, and his 2 daughter-in-laws. So let's start there. Let's take a look at this nugget of Holy Spirit that Tony himself was behind and wanted to make sure we understood. So he had printed in 2015. And let's go back to the beginning of this kingly man's life. And let's start with his mom, him at a young age. He had this to say about his mom. See what you can pick up here. Quote, as a young person, I had some exposure to the truth taught by Jehovah's Witnesses. My dear mother studied the Bible with the witnesses, but she did not progress toward baptism. I thoroughly enjoyed sitting in on my mother's studies. About that same time, I went by a kingdom hall with my stepfather. I asked him, "What is that?" And he answered, "Don't ever go near those people." Because I loved and trusted my stepfather, I took his advice. Thus, I lost contact with Jehovah's Witnesses. End quote. And so the recently canned king's story begins. From a young age, his mom studies. She doesn't become a witness. His stepfather tries to warn him to not get involved with those people. And Tony apparently at a young age was using words like thus. No chance. But in all honesty, sit back for a minute. Wow. I'm going to go out on a limb here based on his age, and I'm going to assume that his mother has passed away. And I can't help but think as I read this story, how incredibly fortunate for him. I mean, if there's good luck, there's nothing like this kind of good luck. She, that being Tony's mom, apparently rejected the governing body and Jehovah's Witnesses of her time, which means by Jehovah's Witness theology, she was dead. And if Armageddon had come at any second when she was rejecting them, she was dead forever. But that's not what they believe now. Fortunately, Armageddon didn't come, so Tony Morris's mom is going to get another shot to live. Right here in a paradise earth in a sundress with a bowl of apples and a koala bear. She now has that hope. How lucky do you have to get? She's going to be resurrected. See a past episode on bad people dying before Armageddon and getting another shot in paradise, summer dresses, and pet tigers. But that isn't even the best part. People, how lucky for Tony Morris III. This means that he never had to look on from heaven and, I don't know, kill his own mother with a fireball, or maybe a good drowning, or maybe an earthquake. It's all up in the air. How lucky is that? How lucky is that? Tony never had to kill his own mom. Maybe he was going to hand the fireball to the Apostle Peter and let him throw it. I don't know. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the same is true of his stepfather. Imagine that guy's surprise when he learns that the little guy he raised is now a king. And as far as we know at this hour, while no longer in the governing body, he is on his way to heaven, or so he says. And well, he's not just a king, but he's one of those Jehovah's Witness people. And not just a regular one, but one of its 144,000 most favorite and honored members. I'm sure Tony at this point will probably skip the part where he got kicked off the governing body. Needless detail. But have you ever seen anyone as lucky as Tony Morris? A man who was appointed by Jesus himself on the governing body has a fast track to heaven that if his mom was still alive and Armageddon came and he was in heaven, he was going to have to kill his mom. Oh my. Yeah, Jehovah's Witness theology. But this biography continues to give us more insight into the recently demoted king priest. Follow along to find out how apparently we are supposed to believe that Jesus was sitting around in 1971. For those who listen to the show, the same year Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin came out. But 1971 isn't a normal date in Jehovah's Witness history. It happens to also be the same year this whole governing body thing happened and was discovered. And we are now supposed to believe Jesus in 71 was sitting around. He saw Tony. And it was at that point that, skyrockets in flight, everything got fuzzy. And Jesus said, I'm going to make that guy a king. And I'm not just any king, but I'm going to make him one of the top guys in the governing body. Tony goes on to tell us how this happened. He says in the same article from 2015, quote, to satisfy my spiritual hunger, I began attending services at different churches. I had always had a love for God, but was not impressed with what I had experienced in the churches. Finally, I ended up going to a Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses in Delray Beach, Florida. It was on a Sunday in February 1971. End quote. That's right. This might mean more to the old timers than some of the younger Jehovah's Witnesses or younger people who have left. Tony Morris III, he of former governing body fame, only found the truth at the exact same time the governing body even became a thing. Weird coincidence, huh? Just a weird factoid. But his story continues. He says, I began my first Bible study with Brother Gardner by asking, so what are we going to study? He answered, the book that I gave you. Incidentally, it was the Blue Truth book in the 70s. Tony says, I have already read it. Brother Gardner kindly replied, well, let's just consider the first chapter. I was amazed at how much I had missed. Folks, the Truth book is like 5th grade reading level, but Tony missed a few things. He goes on to say, I was finally learning about the true God Jehovah. Brother Gardner, whom I affectionately called Jim, studied 3 chapters of the Truth book with me that morning. Every Thursday morning thereafter, we studied 3 chapters. What a privilege it was for me to be taught by that anointed brother who had personally known Charles Taze Russell. End quote. So wait a minute. I simply cannot skip over or ignore a few massive life-altering details hidden right below the surface of what seems to be just another boring Watchtower story bio article. And trust me, there are many. Remember the cheesemaker guy? But if you're familiar with Jehovah's Witness theology and teachings, you have to read that or hear that and come away with a few pretty significant questions about Tony Morris, he who was just canned from the governing body. First, for decades, and I mean decades, the heavenly calling was taught to millions of Jehovah's Witnesses as completed in 1935, as in game over. The door is sealed. No one else gets into the 144,000 club. It was done in 1935. So you're telling us now in hindsight that Anthony Morris III was not only just learning the truth in 1971, but he too was instantaneously anointed and on track to be one of Jesus' favorite guys, again, all in 1971? How did he do that? How did we all miss this? How did we miss this? When Tony Morris III studied with Jehovah's Witnesses, the heavenly calling was closed, folks. It was closed. There was a few remarks about, well, if one or two fall away, we replace them. Always puzzling to this guy, because is Jesus somehow, he has to live within even numbers? Like he's an even numbers guy? If I only have 139,888, I got to replace it. No. We were taught that the 144,000 were sealed. And now we're being taught that Anthony Morris, who has berated us since 2005 as one of Jesus' favorite guys and is anointed, that he was just learning all this in 1971? Do the math on that. In fact, his entire time as a Jehovah's Witness up until 2007, 2 years after Tony Morris became a governing body member, anyone claiming to be going to heaven with Jesus was told they had mental problems. True story. There's several references. Here's just one. The Watchtower of 1996, August 15th, page 31. Yes, if you're doing some quick math, 25 years after Tony Morris became a Jehovah's Witness, we are told this about those going to heaven. Quote, over the years, some, even ones newly baptized in 1971, no, it doesn't say that, have suddenly begun to partake. In a number of cases, after a while, they acknowledged that this was an error. Some have recognized that they partook as an emotional response to perhaps physical or mental strain, but they came to see that they really were not called to heavenly life. They asked for God's merciful understanding, end quote. Got to slip it in somewhere. But folks, right under our noses for his entire tenure as a governing body member, we missed this. None of this apparently applied to Tony. Tony was going to heaven, and even better, to be a king on the earth serving on the governing body. What? Wait, what? Shouldn't Tony have always been just an everyday Jehovah's Witness like the rest of us, hoping to live here on earth, hang out with Noah, where he could obviously get his killing people fix in talking to Noah about flood legends and maybe eating veggies? Apparently, Tony the Morris, while none of us were looking, was above all of that. Maybe, I'm going to throw out my first prediction, maybe Jesus just recently realized this and that's why he canned him? I don't know. Because Jesus told the guys before Tony and Tony himself to make sure we all knew, you can't come up here, you can't join the sky seats after 1935. But apparently Tony just learned about the witnesses in 71. Oh. But as always is the case for those of us that have far too much time on our hands, the overthinkers, my brain benders, and I apologize in advance because I'm that guy. This article on Tony Morris III, just hours after he's left his seated position on the governing body, is chock full of more gems, including, again, if you didn't pick up on it, that the brother who studied with him was a personal friend of Charles Taze Russell, a guy I refer to as Chuck. You know, the first president guy who liked pyramids, who was selling miracle wheat in the Watchtower. and claimed that God only spoke to him. Did you ever realize that Tony Morris III had a direct link to Charles Taze Russell? He does. And so, here goes. From the dark chambers of my overactive imagination and brain, and I would just want to say I have no idea what I'm even trying to say or share or where I'm going with this stream of thought, but nonetheless, I'm sharing it because it's weird. I mean, why did Tony have to go and bring Chuck Russell into the conversation? But here goes. For the old timers, whether, and that sounds condescending, it's not meant that, for anyone who's deeply familiar with Jehovah's Witness theology, make no mistake, it's believed that today, at the time of the recording of this podcast or where you may be listening to it, that Charles Taze Russell is in heaven. He's sitting next to Jesus, Peter, James, and John, Judge Rutherford. They're all in heaven sitting next to Jesus at this very moment. Maybe Chuck's making a few jokes about pyramids and other stuff. I don't know. Listen, maybe they're talking about how Jesus made the universe in 6 literal days. Never mind how you can't even get a day or a night without a sun, so there's a whole bunch of problems there. But details. Who needs them? Maybe they're talking about the photodrama of creation. Who could forget that classic? Chuck. Way to go, Chuck. But make no mistake, Jehovah's Witnesses believe Charles Taze Russell was Jesus' right-hand man here on the earth. And Charles made sure that he told us that himself. In the Zion's Watchtower, 1906, July 15th, page 230, Chuck Russell told us this. Undoubtedly, Jesus was whispering this in his ear, as we'll come to see. He said, quote, "Know the truths I present as God's mouthpiece were not revealed in visions or dreams, nor by God's audible voice, nor all at once, but gradually, especially since 1870, and particularly since 1880, end quote." Let's see, he was God's mouthpiece. He didn't have visions, didn't have dreams, didn't hear any voices, and this all came on to him in 1870. I got questions. We're going to leave it alone. But it's easy to see, by extension, that Chuck Russell would have been in heaven and likely consulted with Jesus on actually choosing Tony Morris. I mean, after all, his mutual buddy, Brother Gardner, studied with Tony. I'm sure Chuck had a hand in this, right? Right? But you see, there is a little problem here. And again, why'd you have to bring Chuck Russell into it, Tony? In the late 1800s, when Jesus was using Chuck Russell, and only Chuck Russell, he had Chuck Russell say the following to his people in the Watchtower of 1895, September 15th edition. Charles Taze Russell said this, quote, "Beware of organization. It is wholly unnecessary." Oh, you're in trouble, Chuck. "The Bible rules will be the only rules you will need. Do not seek to bind others' consciences, and do not permit others to bind yours. Believe and obey so far as you can understand God's word today. And so continue growing in grace and knowledge and love day by day." End quote. What a cool hippie Charles Russell was. But are you confused? If you're confused, you're not alone. And again, to have no clue where I'm going with this, only that it's weird. Charles Taze Russell said you don't need an organization, and by extension, you don't need a governing body. But now he's in heaven building an earthly organization and helped Jesus make a governing body in 1971 of all years. Then lies to millions of Jehovah's Witnesses claiming a governing body has always existed, going straight back to the apostles. But Charles apparently wasn't part of the governing body, so he started his own publishing company and what? Are you following my strange stream of consciousness here? If you're keeping score at home, not only, and again, I'm coming back to Tony Morris in a strange way, not only did Charles Taze Russell say none of this was necessary and even actually warned against anyone promoting a organization and by extension governing body, but if you doubt Oh my God. If you doubt that this mentally diseased apostate podcast host, I then want to ask you this. If the governing body that just kicked Tony out of the club actually existed back then, wasn't Chuck Russell part of that organization and governing body of his day? But apparently he wasn't, and he told us not to even obey one. And newsflash, there wasn't one to obey anyway. It's an easy answer. What does all of this have to do with Tony Morris III getting canned this week? I'm not really sure, aside from the fact that it's weird. But I digress. Back to Charles Taze helping Jesus to choose the freshly canned Tony Morris. How does that work again? Is Tony still excited that his Bible study conductor was close friends with Charles Russell, who just sent a message from heaven to can him from the governing body? Because Russell's up there with Jesus. Did the all-knowing, heart-reading Charles Taze Russell and his boss, Jesus Christ, not know how to read Tony's heart when they appointed him to the governing body? How did they make that mistake? Did they both forget that there was no more anointed people joining them in heaven after 1935? If Tony is out due to drinking alcohol, which many suspect, how did notorious drunk Judge Joe Rutherford vote on the Tony Morris matter? Is Judge Joe behind getting Tony Morris kicked out of the governing body? You'd think they'd be best buddies. Am I the only one that pictures the Apostle Peter, the Apostle Paul, Judge Joe, and Chuck Russell, and then they kind of wave Nathan Knorr over to join them in a huddle with Jesus to talk about what to do about Tony Morris? The questions just never end. And why don't they end? Because Jehovah's Witnesses make it so easy. This is their teachings, their theology. I'm just expounding. I'm asking a few questions. I didn't make it. They did. And those questions never end. But none of it matters because Tony got to study the truth book with the guy that knew Charles Taze Russell, and he is damn happy about it. Not sure if he's as happy about it tonight or if he's wondering why Chuck did him wrong. From the heavens, I don't know. But listen in. The treasures in this journey through Tony Morris's life from 2015 in the Watchtower don't end there. There's more. There's more food at the proper time, which was served up gloriously in this article for millions of Jehovah's Witnesses to read. Listen, if you will, and see where I might be going with one of the main subheadings of Tony's story in the Watchtower, a subheading that goes something like this. It's actually exactly like this. Quote, learning to balance zeal with tact. Yes, tact. You heard me correctly. T-A-C-T, Tony Morrison, tact. Remember, 1971, learning how to have tact, 2023. Here we go. He says, quote, I must confess, however, that when I first learned the truth, I was not very tactful, especially when I talked to my immediate family. Because my first love for Jehovah burned so strongly within me, I boldly but bluntly preached to them. You don't say, Tony. No way, we have no idea what you're talking about. Millions of Jehovah's Witnesses who've watched you on video have no idea what you mean there. So you weren't tactful in the past? In the past, huh? So I'm going to guess that by extension, this article was written in 2015, and now we're in 2023. You've clearly learned to be more tactful since 1971, correct? Jesus, brother, we could expect to be more tactful in the present modern era of 2023, right? I think you're being too hard on yourself, Tony. Your self-proclaimed big brother. Yes, he said that about Jesus. See a talk from 2014 on video. Jesus himself was a master at illustrations, just like you, Tony. The Bible is filled with examples of him lighting matches and blowing them out to demonstrate how eager he was to snuff out the lives of billions of people. You can find in the New Testament Jesus grabbing a little sheep, or better yet, a small child, and splitting them in half like a hot dog. Your words, not mine. But oh wait, Tony, you've certainly learned how to be more tactful, right? Since Jesus personally appointed you to the governing body in 2005. Great job, Tony. Great job. I don't suppose your dynamic use of love, kindness, and tactful speech had anything to do with this recent demotion, right? You've been a governing body member from 2005 to 2023, and in the beginning you said, well, when I was new to this whole thing, I wasn't very tactful. You don't say. You don't say, Tony. We just can't picture that. But as this article goes on, if you weren't aware, King Tony has a wife and 2 sons who are also Jehovah's Witnesses. You may be wondering about his wife, Sister Susan Morris. Well, wonder no more. Just like all the glorious food given at the proper time from the governing body, they were sure to let us know that Susan, Tony Morris's wife, the wife of former governing body member Anthony Morris III, do you want to know what she really loves doing? Because the article helps us understand. Susan, married to this giant among men, wait for it, she really, really, really loves, well, doing laundry. That's correct. Quoting from the 2015 story of this kingly man, it says, quote, in August 2002, Susan and I accepted the invitation to become a part of the Patterson Bethel family in the United States. I worked in the service department and Susan in the laundry. She loved working there. Oh, no. Tony, you've got a chance to tell us all about the woman that means more to you than anybody in the universe. And the fact you want us to know is that she loves doing laundry. I just can't imagine why this man is no longer a part of the governing body. He seems to just be able to read a room like no other. I'm sure Susan Morris came away after this was printed in billions of pages of Watchtowers and thought, thanks, honey. I couldn't help but wonder as I reviewed this, did anyone talk to Sam Hurd? He probably couldn't be reached for comment, which is odd. Sam Hurd has a lot to say about women and their worth. So how dare Sam Hurd kick Tony Morris out of the governing body club? How dare you, Sam? Tony made sure to let us know that Susan Morris's greatest quality was doing laundry. This is off the rails, my friends. You might be asking, look, Stacy, why kick a man when he's down? Why kick him when he's down, right? Poor Tony. I wondered if he has considered the implications of this demotion no matter why it happened, and we do not have it confirmed yet. He is now outside the elite group. He was less valuable to Jesus than 2 new guys that also weren't supposed to be anointed going to heaven or on the governing body. How will he feel moving forward? Every time Stephen Lett bashes children in another talk, or Mark Sanderson gives a local needs talk on gluttony and self-control while his top suit coat button looks like it's about to pop off and hit someone in the face. Is Tony, as he sits in the audience, going to now laugh when Sam Hurd makes funny voices or that laugh track kicks on? Allegedly, because it sure sounds like a laugh track. How's Tony going to feel when new light arrives from the heavens and Jesus didn't want him to be the first one to hear it? Bigger questions include things like who's now going to demoralize gay people at every district convention? But I got to tell you, the one that hit me instantly when I got this news, the one that concerns me is what at this point is going to happen to poor Caleb and Sophia? Now that their main guy, Tony Morris, who introduced them to the universe, is no longer available. He's no longer Uncle or Grandpa Tony, whatever he was. I got to stop with the questions. There's just too many of them. But I think you get the point. The universe has been forever altered. It's been forever altered this week. I don't think any of us 2 days ago, any of us could have foreseen that Tony Morris III, someone that is regularly trotted out on stage as a leader and someone to emulate, would suddenly be canned from the governing body. And look, we could talk about Tony Morris for a long, long time. That man provides so much fodder and so much material. And look, I'm going to call it right now. I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss Tony Morris. He is a treasure trove of insanity, absurdity, and literally a living, breathing example of what the polar opposite of Jesus Christ of the Bible truly is. I mean, that man was a treasure chest of material. And I expect over the next few weeks, we're going to get some great rumors and stories as to why this demotion happened. Lots of conjecture, including mine. Lots of what ifs. But who am I kidding? Who am I kidding? You ask, why kick a guy when he's down? This is the guy that has given children nightmares. He shared to millions of people how he can't wait to get a look at our intestines. And as he says it, he has this smirk on his face that only a solid fist would enjoy kissing. I'm going to keep kicking him while he's down, and I'm going to kick him until I can't kick him no more. This is a bad, bad guy. And you had to wonder how long before this happened. It was getting almost shocking. But I got to tell you, Tony Morris is in some really good company when it comes to kings getting demoted and kicked off the governing body. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this. I'm not sure if the younger generation of Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are aware of this. But did you know that there were at least 3 other guys that got kicked to the curb by Jesus? Again, no word on why he appointed them in the first place since he could read hearts. But yes, 3 other guys. The first one is a damn hero. He's probably the superhero of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, of apostates, of just normal people who recognize other good people, whatever title you want to give him. But one of those people was Ray Franz. Ray Franz is the single most important figure to ever leave Jehovah's Witnesses and expose what they truly, truly are. He is a giant among men. And if there is a heaven and there's Jesus and it's a place where great people go, Ray Franz is smiling because that guy was a good guy. Good guy. I have friends that knew him. Never got to meet him. Big time bummer. Subject for another episode. But Jesus kicked other people to the curb. Ray Franz was one of them, which is, of course, it's irony isn't even the right word. We'll get to it someday. But the other two guys that Anthony Morris joins as governing body dudes that got their butts kicked and kicked to the curb, not so much. And I have to tell you, the 1980s were a wild time in Jehovah's Witnesses, and particularly with the governing body. I often wondered if Jesus was just distracted by the great music or someone handed him a Rubik's Cube. I don't know. Because some really crazy stuff went down, and it seemed like Jesus didn't have his eye on the ball, especially in the early 80s. Now, Ray Franz basically left in 1980, and I have to tell you, as a kid, I had no clue. I had absolutely no clue who Ray France was. And I can say fairly confidently that none of the people I ran around with, most of them witnesses, knew who he was either. We didn't even hear about this event. I don't even remember seeing adults. In 1980, I was eighth grade. I don't remember hearing adults talking about it in car groups. I don't remember hearing a peep in 1980. No one did, unless they were at Brooklyn Bethel. But most people know about Ray France now because he is singularly the most important figure to ever expose and leave Jehovah's Witnesses. I can't recommend his books enough. They are brilliant. Crisis of Conscience, and the other one escapes me. Can't believe it escapes me. It's even thicker and bigger. Beautiful book. Actually, probably my favorite of the two, because I just really love the man. I thought he really was very transparent. Now, most people know about Ray France, but how many of you know about one of the other guys that Tony Morris now gets to join? How many of you know about a good old guy named Edward Chitty? We'll call him Eddie. Eddie Chitty. Got to be careful there. Eddie Chitty was quite a spiritual man. Much like Tony Morris this past week, we got barely anything from Christ's brothers on why one of the men we should revere the most and should obey and die for if necessary at all costs was suddenly out. In 1980, again, do not remember this as a kid, we got this from the yearbook of 1980, page 258, where it simply states the following, quote, "In the past year, Edward C. Chitty resigned," end quote. That's it. Edward C. Chitty resigned, 1980. Yeah. The universe, hanging on everything this man did as a member of the governing body, gets about 3 or 4 words telling us, hey, he resigned, it's over. What? I didn't even know who Edward Chitty was until I was a much older guy. I think I was an elder when I became aware of him. But I was there. And the irony in the company that Tony Morris now joins is that, old Eddie Chitty could have told you and I to not get an organ transplant last week, and if we didn't obey him, we would have been disfellowshipped or called apostates. But hey, a week later, he apparently resigned, and we no longer have to listen to him. If this doesn't turn on some light bulbs in the mind and heart of a Jehovah's Witness, I really don't know what will. We're taught from a very young age that Jehovah's Witnesses is a spiritual organization led by Jesus Christ and his Father Jehovah. It's a theocratic, it's a spiritual paradise here on the earth led by the governing body. We got Ray France leaving. We got Ed Chitty resigning, quote unquote, resigning. And it barely makes news as the universe shakes in its boots. But more on Edward Chitty. You're probably asking, as we are with Anthony Morris this week, what happened here, guy? How do you go from Jesus, a guy Jesus looks at and endorses and hand chooses, to resigning? Why would anyone ever quit on Jesus? Why do you resign? What? Unfortunately for Edward Chitty, his crime was, it was a very serious one. He was gay. That's it. He was gay. And like so many Jehovah's Witnesses undergoing pain and hiding today so that their parents won't abandon them and everything, he hid it. He hid it. And there have been fairly reliable rumors that he was attracted to young, good-looking men. He was a single older man at Bethel. But he was it was fairly wildly known, and I've actually done a little research on this and talked to some people, that he was very attracted to young men, and he oftentimes would request, to be roommates with young, good-looking men, Bethelites. And apparently at one point, one roommate came forward about something that happened that was inappropriate. And I can't tell you what that is. It's unconfirmed what that was. But basically, the governing body, Jesus guys, went to him and asked him to resign. That was it. The story of a man who went from Jesus' right-hand man to being exposed as gay to gone. Again, no word on how Jesus didn't know that he was gay while reading his heart and appointing him to the governing body. But hey, no need to quibble, right? Right? But get this. Edward Chitty remained an elder. He's even quoted in Watchtower articles. Feel free to look it up. He just wasn't getting any new light anymore. He's just a regular kind of king guy now. He, of course, has passed away. But if you're keeping track now, and what makes this week so mind-blowing is Ray Franz left because he knew what Jehovah's Witnesses were. Edward Chitty left because he just wanted to love a man and resigned. But we get to a third guy. And this third guy, this third guy really truly fits in with an organization that today hides pedophiles. I introduce to you governing body, or should I say former governing body member, Leo Greenlees. Good old Leo Greenlees was forced to resign. Do you notice a trend here? Resignations? Like you get a choice? Jesus gives you a choice to stay or go? Does he give a severance package? I don't know what's going on. Leo Greenlees was forced to resign and leave Bethel in late 1984. Again, I was a junior in high school. I had no clue who Leo Greenlees was. But he would often speak at the Gilead graduations. He would speak at the really important business meetings. If you look him up in his story within the library, there's even a 1982 Watchtower that mentions him as being on the teaching committee of the governing body. The last mention of Leo Greenlees as a governing body guy in Watchtower publications is in December 1984, where it's said that he is passing out diplomas at the Gilead graduation in September. But what was Jesus' governing body guy guilty of? Well, you guessed it, because I teased it. In late 1984, Leo Greenlees, he appointed by Jesus personally, was found guilty by the rest of the governing body of molesting a 10-year-old boy. Special note here. Jesus didn't do anything to old Leo. Nothing. The little guy's parents had to call New York and scream bloody murder. Apparently, Leo Greenlees was one of these traveling guys who was friends with the family, and he would often go visit them. But if you think it's bad enough that he was a pedophile and that he was just asked to resign, I want you to consider a few things here. After leaving Bethel, Leo Greenlees continued to serve as a special pioneer, and he was even an elder in New Orleans, Louisiana. He died apparently in the late 1980s. And much like Toni Morris this week, Leo Greenlees' announcement was very brief from Jesus' PR group. It simply stated this, quote, "This is to inform the Bethel family that Leo Greenlees is no longer a member of the Bethel family and the matter is closed," end quote. That's it. Yeah. Take a minute. Let that sink in. Let it sink in. Despite Jesus, Chuck Russell, and the rest of them watching Leo down here on earth hurting children from their sky seats in heaven, they simply decided he could no longer write Watchtower articles and kicked him off the governing body. Because, well, you know, the kids' parents knew and they weren't happy and they were telling people. That's it. But this man continued to serve as an elder and a special pioneer in New Orleans, Louisiana. That's right. The governing body and Jesus himself unleashed a pedophile on the innocent children of Louisiana and had teenagers and even adults alike sitting on judicial committees where Leo Greenlees judged them on such terrible crimes as smoking, touching a boob, or seeing an R-rated movie. You heard that right. You heard it right. The known child molester never faced the legal system. He was never arrested, but was instead shipped off to New Orleans to a kingdom hall to work with little kids in field service and save the lives of other worldly people as a special pioneer. He's a pedophile. That's the third guy that was kicked out of the governing body. And I ask, as I so often do on this show on our more serious episodes, how do you define evil again? Have I said it enough? We are supposed to believe Jesus appointed him and was watching him the whole time. Come on, people. Come on. If that doesn't enrage you, nothing's going to enrage you. I grew up in the 1980s and I knew none of this. They buried it. Why is this relevant in any way? It's to prove, A, what the governing body truly is, B, that this is a momentous week in human history because they just kicked the fourth guy to the curb. Tony Morris is in a governing body hall of fame of sorts. And what fantastic company, huh? To emphasize, this isn't a normal week in human history, according to Jehovah's Witnesses. When we get a one-paragraph blurb on that website that Jesus just demoted a king, it's pretty big news. It should be if you're a quote-unquote spiritual person. And here's the thing. No word yet on if he's still anointed and on the fast track to sit on a throne next to Chuck and Jesus. No word yet on if Tony is just now a normal elder, kind of like Leo Greenlees, shipped off to another congregation, buried in the stream of time. But I feel it's only appropriate at this point, as we close out, to insert some conjecture, some supposition, some predictions. I mean, come on. This whole situation this week with Tony Morris is like Halley's Comet. It's not every week a governing body member gets canned. And we may never get this chance again, not in my lifetime. With Jesus making roster moves, this could be the precursor to us all getting torched at Armageddon any second now. Wouldn't you agree? Jesus is prepping the team, or so we're supposed to believe. But I want to give some predictions. And again, these are all supposition, guesses, predictions at the time of this recording. I wanted to take some time to really think about this dramatic shift in the universe. The first question is, why? I'd like to believe it's all of us that regularly speak out about what a turd Tony Morris is, but it probably isn't. It's just not that easy. After sitting on this news for a little over 24 hours, like the rest of the planet, I personally have come to a few conclusions that I reserve the right to change down the road, and these are what they are. I have a really good gut feeling that the legal department and whoever Jesus has hired for public relations is heavily involved in this decision. I've honestly been fairly surprised, I guess, to say that they've been marching that guy onto stages and in front of cameras for years. He doesn't even fit the company archetype. Not today. Not in 2023. I mean, look at David Splain, Mark Sanderson, Kenneth Cook. Bland is too kind. It doesn't do it justice. They're boring. They're bland. Sure, they all have glasses. They all wear generic, neatly pressed suits. They all speak in monotone voices and do the clumsy hand gestures. But their real appeal is that they're all as exciting as watching paint dry. Don't you agree? They give boring a good name. By contrast, you've got Tony Morris. He brings that what the hell is he about to say factor every time he opens his mouth. While that can be an appreciated element to any group of men, once you get caught buying baskets of booze and the letters flowing in from publishers complaining about what a turd you are begin to mount up and mount up and mount up, people start talking. It's true of every organization. Did anyone but me ever notice that Tony Morris got all the juicy parts? He got talks about tight pants and gay people. He got talks about blowing us all up and what we would look like all torched. When parents complained about the new videos being too violent, who did they march out on stage to tell the parents to shut up? Ah, yes, Tony Morris. I personally think, as an early predictor, that his act was growing old, even among his fellow king buddies. Can you even begin to imagine what that guy's like off camera, with just them in a room? Am I the only one that's wondered that? I have to say the bigger issue that contributes to this news this week, I think, falls in this bucket. I believe Jesus got together with Judge Rutherford and the apostles, and maybe even Jehovah got involved, and he made a conscious decision to rebrand this organization. The younger governing body members are being pushed out front and center. You're seeing it more and more. They enunciate, and they use emotional tones in their talks. They do Pixar videos for kids now. They do music videos for teenagers. They're all too cognizant of what their fellow cult friends, people like Scientology, are going through in the public eye, in the public perception. Am I the only one who's noticed that gone are all the illustrations in every watchtower of a dirty whore riding a dragon breathing fire on the world? Or that there hasn't been a book about Revelation in quite some time now? The books and magazines have become fluff. They're genuinely fifth grade reading level. There's nothing ever new or perceived as deep as it was in the 60s and 70s. Even New Light, or King Jesus canning a governing body member, is nothing more than back page news and one paragraph now. There's nothing meaty or substantial. They're rebranding. They're rebranding. That's my take. And I have to tell you, I'm on the lookout for big changes now. Softer, gentler guys who will eventually, of course, rain fire on us that don't like them. For that reason, just one prediction comes to mind here. I'm going to toss it out there for the group. I think good old Stephen Lett is next. We simply can't have baby haters on camera. Dude's days are numbered. So enjoy that whack job while you can. That's my prediction. I think Sam Hurd's going to fade into obscurity, just like Garrett Loesch. They're just going to be, oh yeah, we forgot you were here. They're going to move all the dinosaurs to the background. Bank it. Don't be surprised if they don't actively seek a really good-looking guy to be appointed next. Someone with looks, charisma, really well-spoken. I'm calling it now. When you get the kind of news we got this week with Tony Morris, I found myself not only absolutely doing backflips, but it was weird. It was a paradox. I found myself disappointed. He's so ripe and rich for material. He's the worst of the worst. But one thing that really struck me this week in all, and it's definitely my generation, to me, Jehovah's Witnesses are becoming unrecognizable to people my age. In the 80s and the 90s, guys like Tony Morris scaring the shit out of everyone was totally acceptable. It was even invited. But now, the Fine Nine in upstate New York, what do you think of that one? What do you think of that one? The Fine Nine are eager to do something about the hemorrhaging of these members because they're hemorrhaging. They're desperately getting guys as young as 20 years old to be elders. And I have to tell you, times have changed dramatically. That would never be considered. I was appointed at 27 and it was so controversial. But I earned my keep and became one of them. But as young as 20? Don't think for a minute I wouldn't love to see Tony Morris facing a judicial committee for getting bombed that features an elder in his 20s judging him. I'll pay to be there. I will pay to be in that room. But more importantly, I guess, as I wind this up, I find myself just having to dismiss the thousands of questions I continue to have about Jesus Christ and his choices as taught by Jehovah's Witnesses. I just sit back and watch one of the guys he handpicked to judge the rest of us, Tony Morris III, experience the type of pain and discomfort and embarrassment and humiliation that he has personally forced on millions of innocent people, including kids. So my final comment is this: down goes the bully. Down goes the bully. I'm here for it. I love it. Hey, Tony Morris, sayonara, you bitch. I want to thank everybody for joining me this week. Wherever you might be safe, and above all else, be well.